Hello, and welcome to another video brought to you from the field house here. We're in the Atris suite today, and I have with me on the phone a guest, Sarahjane Fendrich, who I will give a little introduction for because she does kind of sound like a 6-year-old on the phone, and she is not. So I feel like I should mention that. She is a fellow student of education and is currently actually at Oakland City University, where she is also involved in the student life there and as an ambassador and advocate for the school to the public as a whole. What we're going to actually be discussing is the teen track that just recently happened at the Southwest Home Educators Convention. It was the first time that they had had such a thing. We were discussing worldview and relating it to several topics. Sarahjane was in attendance for most of it, so that's one reason why I have her on. She is going to be a sharp, fresh perspective. Thank you for joining us, Sarahjane.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Alrighty. So the first thing I wanted to just kind of dive right into, I was actually a presenter at the talk. I was speaking on education and biblical worldview in education. There were several people who spoke. The main person who helped put it all together was David Quine, who you may know from Cornerstone Curriculum. And before the whole thing went down, he and I had spent some time talking, and we really wanted to make sure that as a group, these various presenters, we were going to be on a unified theme, and that we were really wanting to focus on the biblical worldview and talk about it. And I was wondering, Sarahjane, if you felt over the course of the sessions that you attended as though that there was a unified theme that came across and what you might have felt like it was, if there was a driving point, or if there were several, what you might have felt that the several of them were and what they contributed.
Right. I did feel there was a unified theme. I think there were different takes and variations on this, but I think that one overarching approach that everyone took was to reflect on worldview is not an end in and of itself, but a means to look at the world and interacting with others and how we go day by day. I think that was really important because it enabled the different speakers to share different beliefs on different things and explain how the world makes you about certain things or how history looks through certain ways, but at the same time, it was practical for the young people who were there, and I think it made it very applicable because they understood not just a list of things that they were hearing, but more a thought process that they could be developing in themselves.
Right. Connected with that, one of the things that I had actually shared with David Quine before the thing began, and that he found to be interesting and wanted to expand further upon, was I contrasted this with trying to be a prescriptive as opposed to descriptive approach to worldview. What I meant by that primarily was I'll go ahead and say, for instance, Bryan College, which had their worldview team, which would go around and do worldview presentations, which by and large is a good thing. I'm not actually meaning to sound negative about them right now, but it was very much more a descriptive approach to worldview. So, for instance, they would play the song, or they would show a video from some movie and say, "Oh, look, we have our list of 5 questions. Let's tick off down them, and then we can tell you what this is." We watch The Watchmen, and we go through the questions. Oh, it's nihilistic. We watch Life of Pi. We go through the questions. We realize it's awful. That was mostly in the refrigerator. And I felt like that was a descriptive approach, but it didn't actually prescribe anything. It didn't give you a way to maybe take your worldview and apply it to issues, or to predict where these worldviews would end up at eventually in culture. And that was one thing that we tried to really hammer on, and it sounds like from your comment you would agree that that was something that was accomplished over the course of the sessions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that you guys really had the nail on the head with that point in particular. And I think it's really important, like you were saying, that the kids who were there understand that they have to understand truth and be able to apply it to personal situations, um, and not just the idea that they know how to react to specific examples.
Right. Well, that takes me into what actually, and like I said, I mean, I don't mean to actually, I know I mentioned Brian Worldview's team and Summit specifically there, but I mean, the Brian Worldview team generally did not have much time. They were always short 2-day, 3-day events. So I understand why you can only address so much. So I'm not trying to be super critical there. But that leads me into actually, I know you weren't there for all of Zach Scheller's presentation on pop culture and worldview. But I thought maybe if you could summarize some of what you thought about from the part that you did hear, and then maybe I can ask you a brief question about it as well.
Well, I thought it was a good talk. I enjoyed what I did hear of it. And I do appreciate the way he talked about engaging with culture and just those aspects of his talk. I think he also balanced well the idea that we can engage with culture consciously and be aware of what we're doing, and still holding on to the truth that we have researched and believe in, and without compromising any of that.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Well, I had said at my session was, of course, immediately after Zach Scheller's. And one of the things that I commented on that I felt that I took away from Zach's thing is that he could have given a whole, like a list. Watch this movie, don't watch this movie, watch this movie, don't watch this movie. But I think he didn't do that intentionally. He seemed as though more he was trying to get the kids to think about these are the biblical concepts of how you react to culture and what you should watch and what you shouldn't, and what you should listen to and what you shouldn't listen to. And you have to, use those concepts as opposed to having, Zach Scheller's approved list of what you can and can't watch.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it seemed I felt as though that point got across to the audience. I was curious, did you feel as though, and I know you weren't there for that whole lecture there, but do you think that was something that seemed to be the case just from the questions that were asked and the comments that were made?
Yeah, I think the direction that the kids took in was a really positive one. I think it, for the most part, went along with what Zach was trying to get at. I think that that's something that is easier for them to be able to relate to and kids to understand and want to delve a little deeper into. So I think that he did a good job of interacting with them and keeping them kind of focused, and then they also kind of went along with what he was trying to get at also.
Right. Well, that also applying worldview to other issues, I wanted to actually jump ahead in the day, jump over my section for a moment, and come back to that later and talk a little bit about Caleb Fendrich's section, who is, of course, the director of admissions at Oakland City University. And he, of course, was talking about biblical worldview and relationships, which he defined, obviously was using the word relationship in a broader sense of the term, not the how to get a boyfriend session as we were joking about beforehand. So you were there for that whole one. What was some of the things that you took away as far as the main point that he might have been trying to make, and some thoughts on that?
I actually really enjoyed Caleb's talk. I think that he hit really hard with the key points that he wanted to make, which is important because you don't want to overgeneralize things and then not actually leave the kids with a lasting impression. So I really appreciated his focus on how we relate to relationships and the way that Christ relates to relationships, and just the importance that he placed on God being a relational God, because I think that that's where you have to start when talking about relationships, to because otherwise it can quickly become humanistic.
Right.
And I think that he did a really good job of starting with an excellent base before moving on to the later part of his talk. And I think that his talk perhaps, and Michael Fendrich's talk, covered some of the things that will, the young people in that room will most likely be facing, not necessarily those subjects in and of themselves, or the battles in and of themselves, but the thought processes that come from how we view relationships is really influencing a lot of things today. And I think that the children in that room, or the young people in that room, are really going to have to understand what relationships mean to be able to correctly fight a lot of the thoughts or mindsets that are going on in the world today about relationships.
Right. And I think one of the things, and I'm also coming this at Caleb's talk from an advantage since I actually spoke with him extensively before he even gave it. I think one of the things that I was interested to see how I was going to handle was when he was referring to, and of course he used the account of Jesus and the adulterous woman as his text for this, but talking about dealing with sin in the context of relationship, in the context of how do we still have a relationship with sinners, that still puts forth the gospel. And I think his verse that encapsulated that I really thought was poignant was where he was, Christ says, "Neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more." So there's very much that emphasis on sin itself is not excused, and it is not condoned. But that there's perhaps more to it than just that part of the story. Conversely, there's more to having a relationship with people who are sinners than merely ignoring their sin.
Right.
And I think that can be a hard issue to deal with. As Caleb was saying, the issues that the next generation will face, in something that I'm more separated from, even though I try to remain involved, is like, for example, he pointed out recreational drug use and the fast-growing legalization of it. Do you think, obviously he didn't have a whole lot of time to go into some of that, but do you think that he left the kids with some good thoughts on how they could prepare themselves to deal with those kinds of issues?
I do. I think it was important, and he covered this well. I think it's important to really be sure of your own convictions in certain areas. And I think he also touched on this when he mentioned the churches and played that clip of the church in Indiana, or wherever it was, as a voice singing that very degrading song. You have to be, it's not enough to say how you want to react to to sinners, to people making life choices that you think are unbiblical. You don't have to know just how to react to them, but why you're reacting to them the way you are. I think it's so important for young people to not just say, because they've been told this, recreational drugs are bad. I think they need to have a good understanding of why they're taking that approach, and that's where the worldview aspect comes into it. You can't just say, this is good and this is bad, and that's what it is.
Right.
Because we're going to be living in a world that socially may be increasingly saying this isn't wrong to almost everything. And the young people in that room have to know how to be able to stand against something that is widely socially accepted and is very socially influential, which is true for illegal or legalization of recreational drugs, and also of, for instance, legalization of homosexual marriage.
Yeah, and that concept of truth, that's what I was talking actually with Mike Fendrich before, again, this thing went on stage, and I was saying that I kind of feel as though on some level we get hung up on prior questions that don't matter as much anymore. For instance, I don't think many people in this upcoming age are really going to care if you believe the world was created in 6 days or 6 billion years. I just don't think that's going to matter as much to people. What's going to really offend them is the fact that you say Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through him. Uh,
Right.
that's where the real battle is going to focus on, and that concept of truth. Which my opinions lead me to actually my section, which was, of course, hands down the best section of the day. I think that goes without dispute. But I was just wanting to get, as a fellow educator, some of your thoughts on just what I said and maybe what you kind of felt the main point that the kids could take away from my session was.
Well, I think I enjoyed when I heard your talk. I think that a lot of what was most applicable was how they could see coming from, I believe all of them coming from a diverse educational background um, with many different approaches and methods. It's a little easier for them to be able to discuss or understand the idea of what you believe being played out in education.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in that sense it was really good because they were able to relate to it well. I think that above all, it's important for what you said, or just for them to understand fully the idea that what you believe affects education or the influence on minds of either young or old so much, because I think we can often underestimate the effect that personal beliefs have on education, because we think that there's a disconnect.
Right.
And I think that them understanding that, because obviously they know that they were homeschooled by their parents for a reason.
Right.
But I think it's important for them to understand just how underlying those principles are. That the effect that their parents' beliefs have had on their education. I think it's so important for them to understand that, and to continue on. It's whether they teach their kids themselves or not, someone will be, and to understand that that's going to play a role.
Right, and I was trying to get that across too when I was talking about, look, we're all involved in education, even if we don't necessarily realize how exactly it is, and about how what you think about man and your worldview of man, or your worldview, which includes a view of man, obviously is going to affect how you teach people and what you expect education to accomplish. There were some things I shied away from using specific terms for in the class because obviously some of the words I would have used just would have not even been relevant. I did drop the term Montessori once, and there was one person in the room that I think understood what I was saying, and I believe that was you. So so I tried to shy away from mentioning some specific methods, but what I was really trying to do when talk about some of that worldview was to mention, like, for instance, we believe man is fallen. We don't believe that man's intellect ultimately can bring him to the true goal of education, the true end result of education. And so that, again, I didn't necessarily want to use the term classical in that talk, because I know that the nuances of that might not have gone over with some of those kids. But what I was kind of hoping to inspire was like, look, what does the Bible say about man, education, where education begins? Does it begin with these classical human thinkers, or does it begin with biblical truth? Not that you don't include classical thinkers. I mean, I have 3 different translations of Plato's Republic in the library. So I obviously am not discrediting that as something that you should know as an educated individual. But really, one of the points that I made that I was hoping they would get along that line was when I used the phrase form as function. in education. Do you think my point there? I asked a few follow-up questions and got what I felt were some decent responses. But do you think that that point um, made sense to the kids, or was it something that might have gone over their heads?
Well, like I said, I think that because of the setting, it was understood.
Hmm.
You could probably give that talk to a young group of young adults and have it
Well, right, naturally.
miss the mark. But I think because of their, at least slightly superior knowledge, I would say, of the idea of different concepts of education, different thought processes behind that, I don't think so. I think that you hit home with most, if not all, of the young adults there. And that it was something that required thought and maybe even some more looking into than they had just that day, but definitely was something that they could understand and kind of be in tune with.
Right. Okay, well, we are going to be running up on the time limit that I had set for us. So, are there any final thoughts that you had that you would care to share about the weekend as a whole, the team track in particular?
I thought it was a good weekend. I thought everyone who I had spoken to that week or since then was really ministered to from the convention and from the experience that they had had. The team track in particular, I really enjoyed. I especially liked it because I think sometimes teams go to talks at homeschool conventions and it's very, especially if it's older people, then it's very much either a sense of it's a class or it's led by a young person who is really happy and energetic and is just trying to entertain them. Mm-hmm. And I think that this hit a very happy medium because obviously I think it was educational. I think that everyone who was in that various talks learned something and hopefully came away with a lot more knowledge and improvement on their thought process. But at the same time, I think all of the speakers just really hit home with not just kind of what they say, short things in the past, or how worldview has changed through the years, kind of a talk, but very, very practical. What will you be facing? What challenges? What has led us to this point, and what do we have looking forward? And I think that the young people really appreciated that because the speakers spoke to them with a tone of respect in that they know that these are the kind of young people who are going to actually studying forward and knowing what they believe and why they believe it, and actually taking a stand on a lot of serious issues coming up.
Right. All righty. Well, thank you again, Sarahjane Fendrich, for joining us, and we appreciate your feedback on the weekend. And I hope that you have a blessed remainder of your semester, and we will be praying for you in your future travels to across the seas.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, once again, thanks for joining us, and we will look forward to hearing from you again sometime in the future.